Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. Spooky month continues with a look at one of the scariest things to ever happen to a duelist, not having any cards in hand, and the deck that thrives on it. For a time, it was one of the strongest decks you could be playing, living at the intersection of great traits and overtuned effects, coupled by a lack of restrictions and held together by a single drawback that would make Sky Strikers blush. Today, it's a shadow of its former self, occasionally getting legacy support to cash in on the nostalgia. But the monster is always strongest when the fear of it is fresh in our minds, and you never know which mention of it is going to be the one that resurrects the beast. Premiering as a trio of promo cards in the May 2009 DS game Stardust Accelerator, I'm not reading that whole title, Infernity was piloted by Colin Kessler in the anime, an old friend of Yusei, Jack, and Crow before the beginning of the events of 5Ds. From there, Colin would go on a whirlwind journey from being a minor dictator of the slums, being jailed for opposing sector security, dying in said jail, being resurrected as a spirit of vengeance, before being revived and finding redemption. It all seems a little flat when I put it together like that, but if I went into more detail, we'd be here for a long while. And I know that because I wrote that in and had to cut it. Trust me, if you want to know more, just go watch 5Ds, you won't be disappointed. Suffice it to say, the powers of the underworld followed Colin into the game itself, with cards so powerful that they would stand as strong, terrifying contenders for a number of formats to come. So let's gather these dark spirits, discover the power of the void, then see what wandering souls won't give us a helping hand. It's time for Infernity Explained. Today's episode is brought to you by my lovely patrons and the fine people over at Dragon Shield. If you want to protect your cards with the strongest scales on the market that even come with their own lore while supporting the channel, use my affiliate link in the description. So, what's the deal with Infernities? Well, they're a series of dark attribute monsters that are primarily fiends, but dabble in a few other types as well. The general game plan of the deck isn't too dissimilar from your usual 5Ds fare. Use a bunch of value effects to turbo out monsters, using them to make powerful extra deck threats. The key gimmick here is that many of these effects won't work if you have any cards in hand. You have to get them all out of there to use those effects, which is referred to by Colin as his handless combo. This would lead to deck lists having a variety of discard outlets, as well as a healthy amount of spells and traps that could easily be set to help vent those cards. In fact, it was so important to the deck's game plan that some, let's say, less than honorable duelists would even set monsters into their spell and trap zone to help clear out that hand, and they certainly were not artifacts. Let's get started with Infernity Randomizer, a level 1 warrior monster with 900 attack and 0 defense, and once per turn while you have no cards in your hand, you can draw a card and reveal it. If you drew a monster, you would burn your opponent for 200 damage times its level, and if you drew a spell or a trap card, you take 500 damage. The gotcha nature of this card might turn you away, but remember that no matter what, you get to keep the card you drew. So at worst, you trade 500 life points for a +1, and at best, you actually get to burn your opponent. That's pretty savage, and if you're able to weave this into your combo line, it can help you dig for more gas or answers. And on top of that, despite its image getting censored in the TCG release, it's doing really well for itself on Twitch. People really flock to those randomizer runs. Infernity Pawn is a level 1 Dark Fiend monster with 0 attack and defense, and during your draw phase, if you have no cards in your hand, instead of conducting your normal draw, you can banish this card from your grave, then activate one of these effects. Either place an Infernity card from your deck on top of your deck, or set a Void Spell or Trap card directly from your deck. This gives us a pretty neat option to set up our plays, and while both of which actually deny us our usual draw, considering our deck, that might actually be a good thing. If you have a draw effect on hand, I know a very nice card you can stack that would be very helpful in this scenario. Just make sure the last thing it does is draw. And while our void options are slim, we do have some nifty ones. Though it is odd that this isn't the only theme that uses the void sub-theme. Infernoids do as well. Secret lore connection, perhaps? Nah, I'm just joshing ya. Dual Terminal is its own thing, completely separate from 5Ds. Or is it? Infernity Avenger is a level 1 Fiend Tuner monster with 0 attack and defense, and when a monster you control, except copies of this card, are destroyed by battle with an opponent's monster and sent to the grave, while you have no cards in hand, you can special summon this card from the grave, and the level of this card becomes equal to the level of the destroyed monster. So you've got a tuner that revives itself, modulates levels, and has no once per turn clause. Mindful duelists will know to run this over last, but if you're not careful, then yeah, this turns into a ridiculous number of additional blockers alongside its own effect. It's not the best, but sometimes you just need a little guy with no body and 2 guns to get the job done. Don't worry, buddy. I'm sure Marvel's gonna call for you any day now. Infernity Mirage is a level 1 fiend monster with 0 attack and defense that can't be special summoned from the grave. If you have no cards in your hand, you contribute this card, then target 2 Infernity monsters in your grave and special summon them. Wow, I am so glad this has the graveyard summon restriction, and not just because this would end up infinitely comboing with itself. Not that this stops Mirage from being a huge combo machine, it just means you're gonna need a few extra steps to get the full value. Turns out summoning banished monsters is now really easy. Trust me, with a little know-how, there's a lot you can accomplish with this card, so the value you get out of it is no illusion. It's a fiend. See? It's right in the text box. Infernity Dwarf is a level 2 warrior monster with 800 attack and 500 defense, and while you have no cards in your hand, all your monsters deal piercing battle damage. Yeah, all of them. Not all Infernities, all of them. That's pretty wild, and I look forward to the day a sprite list runs this purely as a way to make sure that damage goes through, but we may not see that time, since that's all that Dwarf does. If it had some other effect on top of that, or some better stats even, this may have seen more play. But for now, its lack of utility really dwarfs everything else about it. Infernity Sage is a level 2 Fiend Tuner monster with 400 attack and 800 defense, and during your main phase you can discard your entire hand. That's it. It's not a cost for anything, getting your hand empty is the whole point. And if this card is sent to the grave, you can send an Infernity monster from your deck to your grave, but you must have no cards in your hand to activate and resolve this effect. So while the two aren't linked, the first effect does help you set up the second, and really, all of your Infernity effects if you need the help. There's also a variety of ways to get this off the field once you've pitched your hand. Link it into Mirage if you normal summoned it, sync it away with something, crash into something, whatever it takes to get this Infernity into your grave. But try to stick to the first two, wouldn't want to lose too many life points after all. Just a little bit of sage advice. Infernity Beetle is a level 2 insect tuner monster with 1200 attack and 0 defense, and while you have no cards in your hand, you contribute this card to special summon up to 2 Infernity Beetles from your deck. That's right, it's the tuner that makes more than one tuner, great for helping you with Synchro climbing, or making a quick rank 2, whatever floats your boat. It's hampered only by the fact that sometimes you draw 2 beetles and feel a little goofy. Honestly, it's one of those times where you'd actually prefer going stag. Beetle. Infernity Beast is a level 3 beast monster with 1600 attack and 1200 defense, and if this card attacks while you have no cards in your hand, your opponent can't activate spell or trap cards until the end of the damage step. Yeah, once you initiate your handless combo, this monster turns into an ancient gear. But, like Dwarf, its lack of other utility usually means it's going to be left at the wayside for more impactful monsters. Which seems odd to me. I figured that with as big of a following as he has, Mr. Infernity Beast would have a bit more pizzazz. Infernity Conjurer is a level 3 fiend monster with 1200 attack and 900 defense, and while you have no cards in your hand, monsters your opponent controls lose 800 attack. And while you have no cards in your hand and this card is in your grave, you can special summon this card, but banish it when it leaves the field. Wow, this card kicks butt. It can recycle itself to help with multiple kinds of summons, or you can keep it around to apply a fairly substantial attack debuff, to say nothing of what happens when you get 2 or 3 of these on board at the same time. It's also worth mentioning again the interaction this has with Xyz summoning, where the monster will go back to the grave when detached instead of being banished, giving you a great way to keep accessing your rank 3s, letting you conjure up plays out of thin air. Infernity Necromancer is a level 3 fiend monster with 0 attack and 2000 defense, and when this card is normal summoned, it's changed to defense position. And if you have no cards in your hand, this card gains the following effect. Once per turn, you select an Infernity monster in your grave, accept a copy of this card, and special summon it. Reason number 2 why Mirage has its restriction. This can get you back any number of your on-theme monsters, thus being an important link in any combo chain. And yes, it's not a hard once per turn, meaning the more you can field, the more value you get. Hey, quick aside here, since Levier is rank 3, Necromancer can help you make it, bringing back a banished Mirage, which can summon the Necromancer detached for Levier's effect, letting you extend even more. This card is one of the major pillars of any successful Infernity build, and whenever the deck claws its way out of the grave, you can bet this is the monster responsible for bringing it back to life. Infernity Knight is a level 3 fiend monster with 1400 attack and 400 defense, and when this card on the field is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can discard 2 cards to special summon this card from the grave. So this is kind of a way to help vent your hand while keeping a blocker on board. Whenever this gets run over, just jam out 2 cards from your hand and presto, it's back fit as a fiddle. But once again, if you're gonna be a part of the crew, you have to do more than set up the game plan. Twin Twisters pops 2 back row for just a single discard, and you cost twice as much just to bring back a 1400 attack monster? Honestly, if that's all you got, Chivalry can stay dead for all I care. Infernity Wildcat is a level 3 Fiend Tuner monster with 1400 attack and 0 defense that you can special summon from your hand by sending one other Infernity monster from your hand to the grave, letting you get 2 cards out of your hand at once. While you have no cards in hand, you can banish an Infernity monster from your grave to increase or decrease the level of this card by 1 until the end of the turn. So it's a tuner that can shift between levels 2, 3, and 4 to help expand your options, both with Synchros and Xyz. And the banishing can even set up Mirage summons via Levier by putting it in the banished zone. But it's unfortunate that it only banishes monsters and doesn't let you make use of your spells and traps. I also don't want to downplay its modulating levels, but as a tuner that doesn't set up its own summon, it's a bit of an expensive monster that doesn't really pay back its own cost, and really, the deck hardly ever had a problem with fielding the ingredients for a Synchro summon. That being said, it's still worth playing a copy to help you out of sticky situations, but next time around, you've gotta do better. Come on, Wildcat, get your head in the game. Infernity Guardian is a level 4 Fiend monster with 1200 attack and 1700 defense, and while you have no cards in your hand, this face-up card cannot be destroyed by battle or by card effects. Yeah, it's just a wall. Just sits there and resists destruction. No wonder Infernities were so good, they took the quality of an entire archetype and crammed it into like 4 cards, and this is not one of them. Hey, can someone call Hunter Pace real quick, because I think one of his burning skull heads got loose. Infernity Patriarch is a level 4 Fiend monster with 1000 attack and 2000 defense, and if this is the only card in your hand, you can special summon it, and you can only special summon it this way once per turn. And while you have no cards in your hand, if any number of Infernity monsters you control would be destroyed by a battle or card effect, you can banish this card from your grave instead. Wow, this is already miles ahead of Guardian. You get a free summon, you can use it as material, then it provides a similar protection from the grave. It even comes with a great level, so it's not awkward to work with. Hey, looks like the Patriarchy was good for something after all. Infernity Archfiend is a level 4 Fiend monster with 1800 attack and 1200 defense. And when you draw this card, if you have no other cards in your hand, you can reveal this card to special summon it from your hand. And when this card is special summoned, you can add an Infernity card from your deck to your hand, but you must have no cards in your hand to activate and resolve this effect. Here it is, folks, the Face of Infernity. If you've never seen anything about this archetype before, you've probably still seen this card. It's a microcosm of what the entire design thesis of Infernity is. Make cards that are above average in power, so long as you adhere to the restriction of the handless combo. And boy did it succeed, because this card is busted in all the right and wrong ways. While it has its own special summon enabler, the search happens on any kind of special summon. So if you draw this for a turn and have no other cards in hand, that's a search. Summon it out of the grave with Necromancer, that's a search. Use that search to get Mirage, link off Necromancer and Archfiend, then normal summon the Mirage, using it to revive both of them again, link off the Archfiend and link 2, then revive the Archfiend again with Necromancer after you've gotten rid of that searched card. Yeah, you might be seeing where I'm going with this. Even before the Link era, ways of syncing off, tributing, or overlaying Archfiend to get it into the grave just to revive it with something else was the order of the day. Even before the Link era, and the faster and more often you could pull it off, the better. You could banish it for some chaos nonsense, then bring it back with Levier or DDR. Bring it back with Call of the Haunted to get it back and a blocker during your opponent's turn. Add it to your hand with Monster Reincarnation, pitching Stygian Street Patrol just to banish it to summon the Archfiend back. Nothing was off limits. This medium by which you turn revivals into card advantage is so potent, in fact, that despite having gotten a pretty sweet chunk of legacy support around the time of Tri-Brigade, this card is still limited. An odd choice, since 1 is all you need, but I suppose the lower consistency is a good enough reason to keep this in check, even if it isn't restricted at all in basically every other format. Truly, this card is the GOAT, and with horns like that and a face like that, I don't just mean that figuratively. Infernity Archer is a level 6 Fiend monster with 2000 attack and 1000 defense, and if you have no cards in your hand, this card can attack directly. Neat! That's basically like a Gustav Max activation, and if you can slap on some battle modifiers, this damage can get out of hand really quickly. But, you've heard me say it a lot so far, it doesn't do anything to help you out. So unless it's going for game when you otherwise couldn't, it's not really a skill that will help you win. But not for lack of trying, look at the ammo it's using. Archer isn't firing an arrow, it's a sniper rifle bullet as long as its arm. What are they feeding the English to make archers like that? Infernity Destroyer is a level 6 Fiend monster with 2300 1500 attack and 1000 defense, and when this card destroys an opponent's monster by a battle and sends it to the grave, burn your opponent for 1600 points of damage, but you must have no cards in your hand to activate and resolve this effect. Honestly, this is in the same category as Archer. It can potentially do a lot of damage in total if it can run over a monster and deal additional battle damage, but that's about it. It shouldn't be considered too seriously for competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, but I'll tell you what, it's pretty competitive in that waste department. When was anyone gonna tell me that destroyers look so pinchable? Infernity General is a level 7 fiend monster with 2700 attack and 1500 defense, and if you have no cards in your hand, you can banish this card from your grave to target 2 level 3 or lower Infernity monsters in your grave and special summon them from the grave, but their effects are negated. Yeah, it's harder to scream, "Discard me!" louder than this, but this plus Wildcat is 10, so it at least helps you reach some higher Synchro levels. And being able to grab up to level 3s lines up with our thirst for Levier to get back Archfiend, and or Mirage. Honestly, what surprises me is how many attack points it has. I mean, have you seen that sword? Either it's very bendy, or it's made very wrong. And if that is how that sword is supposed to look, then I'm worried to see where General actually gets its attack power from. Alright, let's take a quick peek at our extra deck. Infernity Doom Archfiend is a level 6 Fiend Synchro monster with 2200 attack and 1600 defense, requiring generic material. Once per turn, you can target a face-up card on the field and negate its effects until the end of this turn. Then, if you have no cards in your hand, you can destroy it. While you have no cards in your hand, if this card battles an opponent's monster, any battle damage this card inflicts to your opponent is doubled. And a Dark Synchro monster that was summoned using this card as material can make up to 2 attacks on monsters during each battle phase. Wow, they really loaded this thing up with effects, but not a single one that searches you a card as an homage to the original Archfiend, huh? Oh well, even without it, this card is pretty sick. You've got a negate that's not limited to monsters that can also destroy once you've achieved the handless mode, can deal a fantastic amount of damage by itself with the damage doubling, and even makes for a great rung on the Synchro ladder to make your Dark Synchro monsters even more powerful, because why not? Now, presumably, this is meant to work with 100 Eyes Dragon, a monster that Colin uses to bridge the gap between Infernity and Earthbound Immortal in the anime, and, at least in paper, does need a Fiend non-tuner, so check there, and can banish a level 6 or lower Dark Effect monster from your grave to copy its name and effects until the end phase. Sounds pretty similar to Doom Archfiend, right? And by doing so, 100 Eyes becomes a monster double attacker that can itself deal double damage. It even gets another shot at that negation destruction effect too. But I've actually already covered that card in Earthbound Immortal Explained, so if you want to learn about this, I'd highly recommend going to watch it and keeping an eye out for it. Yeah, I know, that joke is a bit of a stretch, but not as stretched out as Doom Archfiend is, because they gave them the long boy treatment. Infernity Doom Dragon is a level 8 Dragon Synchro monster with 3000 attack and 2400 defense, requiring a Dark Tuner and 1 or more non-tuner monsters as material. Once per turn, if you have no cards in hand, you can select a monster your opponent controls and destroy it, and also burn your opponent for damage equal to half its attack. But this card can't attack during the same turn you activate this effect. This gives you some more removal that can actually help you close out a game, kind of in the same vein as Destiny and Dragoon, except this one is even better, because this doesn't check for the attack the destroyed monster had on the field, just its attack. So you can hit face down defense position monsters and still move the clock forward. And you don't even have to give up your whole battle phase to do it, it just keeps Doom Dragon from attacking. If you have room in the extra, this makes for a great monster to bridge the gap to victory by burning your opponent for their last few life points, or just as a spot of removal to use before folding Doom Dragon into a rank 8. Though, if I may, I feel like we've been misclassifying this monster for a long time. Sure, it says dragon, but look at those crab claws, that screams Aqua. Though, if I'm gonna be fair here, my money is on dinosaur. Look at those little T-Rex arms. Alright, that's all the monsters, now it's time for the spells and traps. Contract with the Void is a normal spell card, and if you have 3 or more other cards in your hand, you discard your entire hand, then you can special summon an Infernity monster or a level 8 Dark Dragon Synchro monster from your grave. Wow, that is steep. Like, yeah, this could be a pretty good starter if you have Archfiend in hand, because you can immediately use it to special summon it and get the search, but that's only going to be feasible on turn 1. And the problem with that is, since Archfiend is at 1, that's not a very likely occurrence, to say nothing of the potential future where you can revive an Infernity Doom Dragon with this. I cannot emphasize how much I do not recommend using this, and if you find this in your contract, you better find a way to void it fast. And since the contract is itself with the void, that's gonna be a little awkward. Infernity Paranoia is a normal spell card that tributes a dark monster to special summon an Infernity monster from your deck or grave with the same level but a different name, but negate its effects. And during your main phase, except the turn this card was sent to the the grave, you can banish this card from your grave, then target an Infernity monster in your grave and add it to your hand. Damn, this card is so close to being really good. Since we're negating the summoned monster's effects, this can't turn any level 4 into a functional Archfiend. We'll have to go up a few extra steps for that. Though, to its credit, it does get it out of the deck. The grave effect isn't so bad. A way to get back Infernity monsters like Mirage is pretty sweet, but the one-turn clock on it is a little much. This is another one of the cards from the Phantom Rage wave of support, and honestly, I'm starting to see a pattern here. A lot of these effects are suboptimal at best, and I'm starting to really fear that the designers are out to get this theme. This creepy little punk is a normal spell card that's always treated as an Infernity card, and it special summons one of your Infernity monsters that are banished in your hand or in your grave. And if a face-up Infernity you control is destroyed by battle or leaves the field because of an opponent's card effect while this card is in your grave, you can set this card. Wow, this is already leagues better than our previous spell cards. True, it doesn't grab from the deck like Paranoia does, so it's still got a place in deck building, but this is a recyclable way to get those monsters back turn after turn without negating their effects. Now, there are some people who are a little, let's say, put off by the name, but as a reference to what is essentially Cullen's redemption arc in Crashtown, I think it's perfect. And besides, if the designers aren't the one giving something a silly nickname, you bet I'm going to. The number of times I've called one monster or another a scrimbly bimbler is off the charts. Zero Max is a normal spell card that you can only activate if you have no cards in your hand. Select an Infernity monster in your grave and special summon it, and destroy all face-up monsters on the field with attack lower than the special summoned monster's attack. But you can't conduct your battle phase the turn you activate this card. This isn't terrible, though losing the battle phase does kind of bite. The board wipe is nifty, but remember it will destroy your own monsters as well, so keep that in mind when picking what to revive. I suppose this is also a good time to mention that this also will not enable Archfiend's effect. Yep, even if you bring it back and you have an empty hand, Archfiend is infamous for missing the timing. And the last thing to happen here is attempting to destroy all monsters on the board with less attack, even if there are no monsters on the board to pop. That might cause a bit of confusion since the conjunctive is "and," which implies simultaneous resolution, but this was printed before problem-solving card text was implemented, and it somehow hasn't gotten a reprint since. You might just want to stick with that creepy little punk, because my enthusiasm for Zero Max went from max to zero in no time flat. Infernity Launcher is a continuous spell card that, once per turn, can send an Infernity monster from your hand to the grave. You can also send this card from the field to the graveyard, then target up to 2 Infernity monsters in your grave and special summon them, but you must have no cards in hand to activate and resolve this effect. This was another huge powerhouse for the theme, and it's basically a spell version of Infernity Mirage. It even helps you empty your hand to get that effect online. Like Archfiend, this is currently limited in the TCG, probably more out of spite than anything else, though the fact that it also lacks a hard once per turn certainly isn't helping. But if this ever comes back, you better believe there's going to be a plethora of people attempting to brew with it, especially because it makes your combos so much easier to pull off, letting you kick back and relax in your Infernity lawn chair. Wave Motion Inferno is a continuous spell card, and while you have no cards in your hand, face-up Infernity monsters you control gain 400 attack and defense. And you can also send this face-up card from the field to the grave to send all cards from your hand to the grave. 400 isn't a bad boost and combines well with Conjurer's 800 debuff of the opponent, causing a huge shift in power, but once again, it's not nearly enough. It's kind of like Sage in that regard, but even that's a monster that can be used as material and can help you set up your grave. But even if that aspect of the card wasn't power crept, it's generally better to actually do things with the cards in your hand instead of just pitching them. So I think it's safe to say that this isn't my favorite form of Wave Motion Yu-Gi-Oh! Infernity Break is a normal trap card that you can activate if you have no cards in hand. You target an Infernity card in your grave and a card your opponent controls, you banish the first target, and if you do, destroy the second. This was another very much feared part of the Infernity arsenal back in the day. It was basically free, searchable spot removal that you could drop at a moment's notice, being used either offensively to ruin an opponent's board so you could go in for game, or defensively by messing up one of your opponent's combos. It could even banish previous copies of Break for its own activation. You might start seeing why I'm so annoyed at Wildcat for not being able to banish spells and traps too. But as time has gone on, this kind of effect has become less and less useful, and there's even a pretty funny counter to it. You have to banish the targeted card in your grave to use this effect, so anything from DD Crow to an Ishizu Shuffler can shut this off. It went from breaking the format to being broken by the format. Infernity Force is a normal trap card that you can activate only when an Infernity monster is selected as an attack target while you have no cards in hand. The attacking monster is destroyed, and you special summon an Infernity monster from your grave. That's a pretty good trade-off, actually. Sure, it's a battle trap, so it's susceptible to all kinds of interaction, but if it goes off, that's a free monster with potentially lots of utility to work with. Summoning the monster is even the last thing to happen, so Archfiend gets the search. How nice. Still, it's a bit too slow and a bit too low to the ground to actually see play, so I won't force you to run it. Infernity Inferno is a normal trap card that has you discarding up to 2 cards to send the same number of Infernity cards from your deck to the grave. This covers 2 different tasks, emptying out your hand while filling your grave. This gets you more targets for Necromancer and Mirage, as well as getting Avenger all lined up to do its thing. But there really isn't much else to say about it. Not a lot going on here, but whatever is going on, Destroyer is super excited for it. Must be a big fan of alliteration. Infernity Reflector is a normal trap card that you can activate only by discarding all cards in your hand when an Infernity monster you control is destroyed by battle and sent to the grave. Select and special summon that monster from your grave and burn your opponent for 1000 damage. This seems nice. It gets cards out of your hand, it returns one of your little units, and it even takes a bite out of your opponent's life points. But every step of the process just doesn't line up. Like, if things are going as they should, you'll already have an empty hand, which means you won't be able to discard anything to get this card going. And only triggering on battle destruction has only gotten worse over time. The monster that was destroyed might not necessarily be the one you want to revive either, and 1000 damage is pretty paltry all things considered. Can't really recommend, but I am enamored with the art. Who are these 2 mysterious muscle-bound grapplers? Why are they so jacked? What's their story? Konami, I need this in the next valuable book stat. Infernity Suppression is a normal trap card, and if you have no cards in your hand, you can activate this the turn it was set. When your opponent activates a monster effect while you control an Infernity monster, negate the effect, then you can burn your opponent for damage equal to the activating monster's level times 100. That's actually kinda cool. One of the deck's big issues, especially nowadays, is negating the Archfiend, and while this won't do jack against Imperm, this does hit Ash, even on turn 1. You're even able to activate it the same turn you set it with Infernity Pawn's effect, which is very valuable. Granted, you will need to have found a way to empty your hand before that point to actually play it, but if you couldn't do that, you weren't activating Archfiend anyway, so that's hardly an issue. I'm just glad that they're letting Randomizer have some fun, but it does realize it doesn't have the censored art anymore here, right? It doesn't have to shoot a laser beam, right? Phantom Hand is a continuous trap card, and once per turn, if you control any number of face-up Infernity monsters, you can remove from play all cards in your hand face down until your next standby phase. The design here is actually kind of brilliant. At any point, you can effectively go handless while still getting access to the cards later, thus enabling your Infernity effects. Though, in actuality, duelists would just build their decks around being able to accomplish this naturally, so they didn't have to spend one of their precious cards doing something they were more than capable of accomplishing without it. Which is valid, it's just a shame to see such nice card design go to waste. Sorry, Danny, but it looks like you're destined to be Phantom Zoned. Void Cauldron is a continuous trap card, and if any number of Infernity monsters and or level 8 Dark Dragon Synchro monsters you control would be destroyed by an opponent's card effect, you can banish an Infernity card from your grave instead. And if you have any cards in your hand, send this card to the grave. That shouldn't be what the having no cards in hand stipulation should be. Like, if you draw a card for your draw phase, you lose Cauldron. You could argue that's what Pawn is for, which makes sense. It can even get this card to set it up for later, but what about Infernity Archfiend? You know, the one that searches? The one the entire deck is built around? Arguably, you could flip this up when you're done, but I would argue that you'd want that kind of protection while you're setting up your board, which is still a moot point because it is a continuous trap card, so you'd have to wait a turn, and you've probably done all your board setting by that point anyway, so it's still just a little, yeah. It's basically like those continuous spells and traps I hate so much that blow themselves up for no reason. It kinda sucks. Sorry, but this card is a massive waste of time, and besides, we already have the Patriarchy, so I just don't think this card is enough to justify itself. Infernity Barrier is a counter trap card, and when your opponent activates a spell card, trap card, or monster effect while you control a face-up attack position Infernity monster and have no cards in your hand, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. This was another of the big threatening cards in the deck. Back in the day, Omni negates like this weren't common for archetypes to have. So the deck having access to a searchable one meant that anyone trying to break an Infernity board was gonna need to chew through them, because you know they were searching at least one over the course of their combo. Nowadays, these kinds of effects are as common as it gets, but back then, it was kind of a hard check to most decks, because you'd need the right cards to get past this barrier. Alright, that's all the Infernity cards, but what do we do with them? Well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We need to find Archfiend and a way to loop it to get all of our best cards, and utilize the bevy of value generated to build a fantastic board, using it to either OTK or set up some gnarly negates. The only question now is, how? So what can we play to help them out? Finding our way to Infernity Archfiend is paramount, and thankfully, we have a lot of ways to do it. A great way to accomplish this is with Tour Guide from the Underworld. Normal summon it, getting Fiendish Rhino Warrior right out of your deck. Link summon into Cherubini using both, and now you have a total of 2 Foolish Burial effects you can take advantage of. Rhino can send any Fiend, so you can set up a Stygian Street Patrol, Necromancer, or an Archfiend Heiress, which will trigger its effect to add Archfiend to hand. Then, Cherubini can send any level 3 monster from your deck to the grave, which can also send a Necromancer or Heiress. So feel free to utilize those effects in whatever way fits your opening hand. And from there, Cherubini is more Link material to climb up with. And while intended to be an Infernoid card, Void Apocalypse lets you pitch a card to send any Fiend from your deck to the grave. And hey, if you need a target for Infernity Pawn, maybe this one isn't it, since you would need to discard and you can only use Pawn with an empty hand, so we'll table that suggestion for later. Oh, speaking of Void cards, Into the Void has Infernity cards on it and kinda works with our theme, but only kinda. It's great on your first turn as a way to upstart Goblin deeper into your deck and guarantee you'll get a 0-card hand later in the turn, but doesn't mesh well later on in the game. Since you need to have 3 or more cards in hand to activate this, you might not even be in a position to actually play this, and will be forced to set this in the spell and trap zone for no value to reestablish your empty hand. What about some good extra deck monsters we can leverage? Well, right off the bat, one that comes to mind is Void Ogre Dragon. It's no Infernity barrier, but once you get that handless combo, it still covers spells and traps, which is pretty good. However, the big one I cannot recommend enough is Saryuja Skuldread, the poster child of gigantic solitaire combos. This card does basically everything we want. It's a big material sink to clear out our board and reset Archfiend. It special summons cards out of our hand, which can enable Archfiend or get Mirages out of our hand, and helps us dig deeper into our deck for gas. And while on an empty hand, we're only going to end up having a single card left over after we put back the 3, we're always picking the best one out of them. And because it doesn't end up clogging our hand too much with too many draws, it's not too difficult to reestablish the handless combo. Cycle through as many of these as you can get your hands on, then recycle them so you can do it all over again. Allure of Darkness is actually a pretty funny and useful include here, because yeah, we have a ton of dark monsters, we're basically the target audience, but if we whiff, well dang, I guess we no longer have any cards in our hand. Better use all of our Infernity effects. There's a lot of boss monsters we can access with this deck, but what about the ones that can best utilize Infernity Doom Archfiend? Which dark synchros would benefit from having 2 attacks? Well, Borreload Savage Dragon is certainly a candidate, not only because you'd be playing it anyway to set up more negates, but also because it gets a huge boost when you inevitably absorb the Saryuja Skuldread under it, so getting more attacks out of it just makes sense. Chaos Angel also wouldn't be a terrible idea, especially if you can land a level 4 light on board to get the full value. Even without it though, a double attacking 3500 monster that banishes a card on summon ain't too bad. As for a silly tech pick, you could try Edgem Sabers. It's a fiend, it fills another level 3 slot, is always ready to help you get a card out of your hand every turn because you can use it every turn, meaning you have even more material to make your extra deck monsters. And if you're in a pinch, you can take an Archfiend in your hand and stack it on top of your deck so you can draw it next turn. Alright, that's all the info I have about Infernities, but how does it stack up against the Nova scale? Novelty. Infernity was a big step forward in terms of power creep, I don't think anyone can deny that, but it would come to embody a lot of what made Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! In the coming years. Emptying out your hand would seem ludicrous back then, and while you would always like to have gas available in case things stall out, the only thing you want in your grip nowadays when you're done with your plays are hand traps. If you've got a card in there that isn't doing anything, it's worse than not actually having a card. It's not seen as having a resource for later, it's seen as poor deck building. And Infernity Barrier was a huge design decision, giving gigantic combo decks the ability to protect themselves with hard negation in engine. So honestly, whether you love it or hate it, I've got to give Infernity a 5 in novelty. Objectivity. This one is going to be strange because as far as power levels go, Infernity is nowhere near what it once was. That being said, it almost makes the deck even more insufferable if you have to face it. Once they get their hands on Archfiend, minutes of your life just drain away as they loop their cards over and over and over again. And because a lot of it is based on random draws from yugioh, you can't just fast track to save time. It's all dependent on the top cards of your opponent's deck, so Infernity is going to get points knocked off for its abysmal usage of time. So the theme, even at its current power level, gets a 3 from me. Versatility. We've got another case of a deck that loves to incorporate cards from another deck's pool, but very rarely plays nice with others. Infernity Archfiend really is a big build around, so while we can absorb cards like Tour Guide and the Dangers, it's not really branching out. So the deck gets a 2 in versatility from me. Awesomeness. There was a time I was in awe of Infernity. Its raw power, its sustainability, the skill it would take to maneuver down your combo lines to actually establish those boards. But now, I'm just bored. Even Infernity's gimmick of making sure the hand is empty has fallen way to the realization that that was always the optimal way to play the game anyway. I still get a nice nostalgic feeling whenever I see Archfiend Search Barrier, but not much else. So I'm giving Infernity a 3 in awesomeness, which means this archetype gets a 13 on the Nova scale. And that's all I have to say about Infernity. While I do wish they would get a proper wave of support cards, another part of me is glad that the only people running this are the most dedicated disciples of the handless combo. And trust me, we have more than enough people playing gigantic solitaire decks as it is, taking up more of our time at tournaments. Dragon Link, you got off too easy. And adding Infernity to the mix certainly would not be a helping hand. But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Are Infernities victims of their past selves and deserve forgiveness, or should they stay exiled to Crash Town where they belong? And which one's your favorite? I really like the energy Avenger is giving off, very goblin mode of it. Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, please make sure to like the video, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and share this video with somebody you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh! It really does a lot to help me out. Today's episode was brought to you in part by Dragon Shield. When you want to protect your cards with the power of dragon scales, get some sweet lore for them, and support the channel, check out my link in the description to get started. Today's episode is also brought to you by my lovely patrons, including this month's illustrious Quasar Commander Frankie, Nebula Navigator's 3rd Dynasty, Ada Basilisk, Adam Zajdel, Andrew Newman, Kane Senpai, Chibi Gohan, Christopher Fuss, Clockswork, Danny Bound, Dark Dragon X830, Eric, Aaron the World Breaker, Garland Chaos, Genesis Yu-Gi-Oh!, Green Knight, Great Big Pillock, Hairbear, Harry the Ominous Benefactor, Howling Zangetsu, Hydrocraft 135, Iron Zero, Iskander 711, Mana Charge, Marion James E. Picata, Mega Combi, Millennia Asta, Molly Renata, Nathan Vig, Natiel Lee Alexander, Orozco 09096, Panther J, Rebel King Lucifer, RJ the Jank Monarch, Sammy Haim, Sir Knight JCB, Skybuster Leo, The Wizard Moose, URTV 667 and Xander Wolfensberger, Cosmic Crusaders Almento 5010, A Random Pup, Ariel Kersey, Beluga Masta, Blue Gem, Chaz Ghost, Corbinisms, Drachenwald, Drake and SpongeBob be like you used to call me on your cell phone, Dripfed Tar, Eki Bullock, Emony, Eva Padilla, Hike Boyagian, Herbal D, Inblink, Jester Designs, Kale the Dragon, Carp, Kendall Wishmeyer, Kevon Public, King Scarlet Yu-Gi-Oh!, Lemon Yu-Gi-Oh!, Lord Whoop-De-Doo, Manga Pages, Matt Simmons, Michael Shimabukuro, Nitromo, Shizuki Nijimura, Sophie, apparently, Stephen Williamson, Taylor Seymour, The Legendary Raven, Tucker Ordorn, Venusian Teapot, and Zaldreka, as well as the lovely Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. If you'd like to help me in my quest to cover all of Yu-Gi-Oh's archetypes, watch my videos early, participate in monthly custom card reviews, and be a part of these credits, I'd very much appreciate it if you checked out my link in the description and consider joining, as every pledge helps make the channel that much better and helps make all this a little more stable. And if you want to learn more about Colin's former teammates, check out this video covering all the cards used by and associated with you say. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.